Welcome to the CG Pro podcast. And today, on episode 75, we have Adam Howard, who is a visual effects supervisor. He's done some amazing work on some movies that you will probably all know, for lots of Star Trek and some amazing historical visual effects movies like Pirates of the Caribbean 2. Um, it's a great pleasure to have you here today, Adam. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, mate. It's really nice to be here.
You bet. Yeah, great to have you here. So yeah, for our audience, if you enjoy today, you can follow us at becomecgpro.com, find out more about the school, or join our free Facebook group. And we do have an open day coming up on the school side on the July 23rd for Europe, and in another couple of weeks for the US. But yeah, great pleasure to have you here today, Adam. I am really excited to talk about your career and about computer graphics and filmmaking and art and all the fun stuff that we both love.
Excellent. Let's jump in.
Yeah, let's do it. I always love to start off just by finding out a little bit about how you got to this point. So I know that you started from the beginning, the dawn of the visual effects industry, and you've done all sorts of cool stuff and to get to the point of being a visual effects supervisor. How did you get going in the first place?
I started as a graphic designer in Melbourne, Australia, where I was born. And I was working at ABC Television doing news graphics, and it was all pre-computers. So there were no CGI, no computers of any kind being used in TV. And so all the graphics that would go over the newsreader's shoulder, talking about the story that he was reading or she was reading, um, were all handmade. And we would go scouring through magazines and find photographs of famous politicians at the time or actors or whoever, and cut them out with a scalpel and glue them down and airbrush a shadow and rub down Letraset for the text. And it was all, when we look back at it now, incredibly primitive. But at the time, that was the state of the art. And the art director called me in after a few months, and I was only about 17. And he called me in and said, "Look, you need to sit down because I got to tell you something." And I thought he was going to fire me. And he said, "You know that big box that's out in the lobby, out in the corridor? They say it's a computer that does graphics." And we just both laughed really hard because we had been looking at some of the CAD systems that were around for architecture, but none of that did anything like what we needed. And so he said, "Just take it out of the box, get engineering to put it together for you and see what you think. And when it's a piece of rubbish, we'll get rid of it." And it was what ultimately became known as the classic Quantel paint box. And I think it was one of the first ones in the world. There were a number of them in the UK being used, and there were, I think, maybe a couple in the States. And this one was a traveling one that was traveling around the world, and it had ended up staying with us. And I got on the thing, and it was like a Vulcan mind meld. I just connected with this tool. It was a tablet and a pen. The tablet weighed about as much as my car. The pen was made out of steel, had a steel cable. It had the massive storage of, I think, 4 megs, which was just mind blowing to us. How are we ever going to use all this storage? But we instantly just started making graphics, and we went from 7 or 8 of us making about 9 graphics a day to 2 of us making 50 graphics a day. And it just sped up the process incredibly. And anyway, so that was the beginning. And then I started doing animation on it, and animating visual effects, which is what had always been my passion. And all of a sudden I had a tool that I could do it with instantly. All 2D, all one frame at a time, traditional animation, but just in a digital tool. And started doing main title animations for Australian comedy series. And I think we did the very first fully digitally animated main title sequence in the Southern Hemisphere for a show called The Jerry Connolly Show. And then went on from there.
So did you study in film or anything
No, I
like that?
studied
Or you
graphic
just kind of
design.
jumped in early? Right.
No, I studied graphic design. There were no film schools that taught this. They just didn't exist. There were film schools if you wanted to be a director or a producer
Yeah.
or an actor, but not anything technically. And so I I went to Monash University in Melbourne and studied graphic design, and uh, went out with the hope and dream of working at ABC, which is the job I ended up getting. Uh, and at that point, when I got the job, computer graphics wasn't even something that was in my mind because it didn't exist in the world.
Right.
Uh, so yeah, I studied graphic design and majored in illustration and animation.
So you broke in pretty early then at 17.
Yeah, I was. It was like 1979, 1980, something like that. Uh, and it was crazy, and it was funny because the guy who ran the graphics department, said, look, you're the only one who knows how to operate this thing, so you just run it. And so I got to do that, which was really fun. And then we ended up with a bunch of us in that department working on Paintbox and just slamming out work all the time. And the thing was that it only had um, a certain amount of time that we could spend on it, because there's only a certain number of hours in the day, and so the traditional artwork kept on going. At the same time I was doing digital animation, I was still doing traditional artwork. We did another show that was huge airbrush illustrations, and they were about 5 or 6 feet across and just all traditionally illustrated, and then did camera moves on those, old school. uh, but it was interesting just to see how the technology was developing, and how we went from a very heavy tablet to smaller ones eventually, and metal pens to plastic pens, and wired pens to wireless pens. And it's been great to see at that very early stage how that stuff developed, and then now it's just exponential jumps.
Right. Yeah. Well, so what happened next? You so stayed there for a bit,
So I was
kept
there
doing that.
for 4 years, I think, and then I went to a company called AAV, which was Armstrong Audiovisual, which was at the time the biggest post-production company in the Southern Hemisphere, and they were mainly an advertising house. And they started a small offshoot unit called AAV Options, and we specifically just did visual effects and corporate work. Um, and so I was visual effects supervisor there, but I was also a compositor and animator, and I was a one-man department. Um, and then they moved us back into the main AAV building, and we were doing music videos. They were doing music videos for In Excess and all kinds of people, and
Cool.
we did a lot of commercial work. I stepped into 3D very early in that company, um, and I can't even remember the name of the software now. But there was a package that did 2D paint and 3D. Didn't do either of them very well, but at least it was a way to play with the stuff. But meanwhile, we had a V series paint box, and I was doing all the work on that and on Harry, the Quantel's compositing system.
Mm.
Did a TV show called Round the Twist, which was a
Oh
hugely
yeah.
popular, hugely popular kids show in Australia.
It's big in
Um,
England too.
oh yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
I
Oh
did,
yeah. I've
did
watched all of them.
I did all the visual effects animation for that,
That
and
was a great show. Used to love that show.
then while I was there, we were doing the dailies transfers for the reimagining of Mission Impossible TV series. And the TV series that was being made, this is like 1984 or 5, um, was being shot in Queensland in Australia, and then they would fly the film down to Melbourne, and we would transfer the film, and then satellite uplink it to the post group in Los Angeles, and the post group were doing all the visual effects work, and editorial and everything. And so I had a contact at the post group, and as a result of that, I had a contact through Paramount, with the producer who was the producer on that show. And so around 89, I decided to come over to the States and just have a look, see what was out there. And I came over, and I was very lucky to meet with Richard Edlund at Boss Films, and the guys
Wow.
over at Dream Quest, and had some really incredible meetings. And Richard said to me, I'm very grateful that he said it to me. He said, if you want to come back, we'll give you a job. And so I took that to heart, and so went back to Australia and sold everything, bought a ticket, and the following year moved here. But in the time that that happened, the things had changed a little bit at Boss, and they weren't ready to move into digital, and so that job didn't happen. But I ended up getting a job after about 3 months. I got a job at ABC Television in Hollywood in their on-air promo department, and just doing, the ABC movie of the week. And but one of the shows that we got in to do a main title for was the Jim Henson series Dinosaurs. And
Oh, cool.
so the kind of Ben-Hur text that says dinosaurs and
Yeah.
the egg that drops in and cracks, I illustrated and animated all of that stuff. Um,
Oh, that's cool.
and got to go on set and meet Brian Hansen, Jim's son. And I had met Jim years earlier when I was 19. And so we had a little bit of a connection there, which was good. Um, and, I came to the States with what I look now at as a complete pipe dream, which was I wanted to work on Star Trek: The Next Generation because it was the biggest visual effects show in the world. I wanted to work on MacGyver because MacGyver was just insanely cool, and I
Yeah.
wanted to work on Star Wars. Star Trek and MacGyver were possibilities because they were both still in production. Star Wars was not a likelihood because they'd made the first 3 films, and as far as everybody
Yeah.
knew, that was it. Um, so within 7 months of being here, I was offered the job on Star Trek,
Wow. That must
and
have been so exciting.
it was absolutely amazing. And Rich Thorne at the Post Group, who I'd met at the Post Group and talked to him there, he wouldn't hire me there. It turns out he wasn't going to hire me at the Post Group because he wanted to hire me at Digital Magic.
Mm.
Um, and so I went to work on Star Trek as the assistant to Steve Price, who was the lead animator on Star Trek. And after just a few weeks, Steve announced that he was leaving. And on a Friday, he left, and he was going up to ILM to do the fairy dust and footprints and stuff for Tinkerbell and Hook at ILM.
Oh, cool.
And so I thought, oh, this is great. I finally got my dream job, and I'm going to lose it because he's gone. I'll be gone. And so the Monday morning following the day that he left, Rich came in and he said, "Well, I got very good news and I got very bad news." And I said, "Oh, okay, so what's the very bad news?" And he goes, "Well, the studio's not happy because Steve's left, and it was right at the end of a cliffhanger episode, and so we've got an episode which is done and an episode which hasn't been started, which has to look exactly the same." Um, so yeah, it's been an unfortunate weekend of conversations. And I said, "Well, that's wonderful. So what's the good news?" And he goes, "The good news is you're it." And so I started as lead animator, and we were doing the Phase of Fire and any kind of animated weaponry from the show. So I started at the beginning of season 5 of Next Generation, and and then just kept on going. And I loved the stuff that Steve had been doing, but I wanted to make it feel a little bit more real in the way it looked, and I pitched that as an idea to the studio, and they said, "Well, if you can do it in the same amount of time that he did them, go for it." So I worked out a new way of animating the phases and streamlining the process a bit, but while making them a bit more detailed. And unfortunately, I was the one responsible for adding anamorphic lens flares to them, which JJ then went and ran with in the movie. Um, but I felt that if you had a light source pointing straight at a camera, you were going to get that, and it was something that was missing. And so I started adding all that stuff. And the first year here, we got nominated twice for the Emmy Award, and we won them both on that first night, which was amazing.
Wow.
Um, and and then maybe a year after I started working there, I ended up working on MacGyver as well. Um, and then about 10 years later, got the phone call from ILM to go up and help them on Master and Commander for a 4-week gig. And that 4-week gig ended up turning into nearly 5 years and 17 movies, including Star Wars. So I got my
Wow.
list of 3, which I was very lucky.
Wow. That's super cool. Childhood dreams coming true.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So never stop dreaming because you can make it happen.
Yeah. Well, must have been a very exciting adventure, especially at the beginning part of the States. So much happened in that in a year.
Yeah, Image G was shooting all of the miniatures for Star Trek, and that stuff was just beautiful work. Guys like Tony Meininger and Greg Jane were building models. ILM had built the model of the Enterprise for the main titles. Interesting on ILM, they get the credit for visual effects on the show. They only worked on the main title sequence. All the visual effects were done by either the Post Group or Digital Magic. And everything was shot and run by Rob Legato and Dan Curry and Ron Moore and Dave Takamura and Gary Hutzel, just all legends in their own right. And they were essentially my bosses from the Paramount end. And one of the joys of Star Trek was that Dan Curry and Ron Moore would go and shoot elements all the time. And the element reels were our filters. We would need some kind of amorphous light thing, and we'd end up using laser beams shot through melted plastic, and use little pieces of them. And then we had like 9 really beautiful big explosions which had been shot for the show, and we would use tiny little pieces of explosions for like a tendril, and we'll sometimes use a still frame of the sparks from an explosion as texture on a face. And those reels were called the Dan and Ron reels, so the DRE reels. And we used those DRE reels every day and knew every single element on every reel backwards, because there was just hours of priceless footage there to use as the starting point for the images that we would end up creating for the show.
Right. Something about it being photographic that is still really hard in computer graphics. If you just start with computer graphics, it's hard to get back towards photography.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for physics and nature. What happens in front of a camera when you shoot something is not always controllable. And as a visual effects supervisor, one of the things that we rely on is exactly that. That if you try and go in and predetermine every single thing that's going to go into a shot, you're never going to really think of everything because you just don't have time. But when you shoot something for real, little happy accidents happen, and sometimes they are things that you would never have thought about, but they're just a freak thing that happens in the lighting with a reflection or a shadow or something, and it ends up being a very cool part of the element, and you use it. Other times, I was doing a movie a few years ago with Liam Neeson, and we had to blow up the Hotel Adlon in Berlin. And the initial thought from production was, we'll do it all CG. And I said, why? Why not just build a miniature? Build a miniature and blow it up. And you call cut, and it's done. And they did. They built a beautiful miniature over in the UK, and it was perfect. And so, yeah, I'm a big proponent of using the right tool for the job, and whether that tool is CG or it's practical or whatever it is, you just pick the right tool.
What was it like watching the evolution of all of this happen? I mean, you saw a lot of it, I'm sure, at ILM by the sounds of it, the progression through
Yeah,
digital.
ILM is constantly developing new stuff. We did a movie called Jarhead there, and one of the tools that was used a lot on that was the new tool Xeno, which was able to track shots and put elements into shots and much more easily than stuff had been tracked before. And we were doing the big oil fields, and Xeno was crucial to that. At the same time, as there were huge technological advancements with that kind of stuff, we were also just doing really down and dirty stuff, like on Pirates of the Caribbean, where I did a shot on Pirates of the Caribbean 2, where Jack Sparrow falls down a ravine and lands on his back, and a bamboo pole hits the ground next to him, and he kind of turns and looks at camera with the thing hitting the ground in front of him. And we had no bamboo pole, and we had no grass, we had nothing, so I just animated the whole thing from nothing as a 2D animation, and that's what's in the movie. And so the beauty of ILM is that again they do whatever works to make the shot, uh, and if it requires a huge technological advancement, then they will put the time and money into doing that. And if it is something that can be done with string and sticky tape, they'll do that. So long as it looks right, that's all that matters. And that's kind of the underlying thing with visual effects anyway. That so long as it looks and feels right, it doesn't matter how you get there, because if the audience is worrying about how the technique or what the technique is that was used to make it, then you failed before you even started. You got to completely immerse them in the story. I remember years and years ago, maybe 1992, 93, I was lucky enough to have a phone conversation with Linwood Dunn. And Lynn invented compositing basically by inventing the Acme Dunn optical printer back in the 20s and 1920s. And
Yeah. Sorry, we're back in the 20s again.
yeah, exactly. And he he did the optical comps for King Kong, Gone with the Wind, Citizen Kane, Bringing Up Baby, just incredible films. He was also the guy who shot all the miniature stuff for the original Star Trek TV series. And so
Cool.
I said, if I'm ever going to ask anybody this question, it's got to be you because you invented my job. Um, what would you recommend for a long career in visual effects? And he said, oh, that's easy. He said, you spend your entire life being invisible. And I said, okay, why? And he said, because the second you make a shot so cool or noticeable that somebody says, wow, what a cool visual effect shot, you failed because you made it about you and not about the story. And he said, we only have one purpose in this job, and that's to serve the story. He said, so be invisible your entire career and you'll be here forever. And I think, that applies to everybody. He
Yeah.
Whether
Very
you're a costume designer or you're a producer or you're an accountant or you're a visual effects guy, so long as nobody's thinking about that stuff, you're okay.
right. Unless you're a nerd who's interested in the behind the scenes obsessively, which is what I was.
Like us. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Jurassic Park was the one that did it for me. It was like, as many I know, but that I mean, the first use of computer graphics to that level for
yeah,
sure. And it was what made me want to go to ILM and actually got to go and work on Jurassic World 20 something years later
yeah,
and used Xeno.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, amazing places. What a so much history there. I felt like walking into a museum going there. Just
I think one of the things about ILM for me was that I had been in love with ILM since Star Wars. I mean, I went to Star Wars on opening day in Melbourne, and my entire life changed because even though I loved sci-fi, I loved Star Trek on TV, um, to see all of that stuff on a big screen was just mind blowing. And um, I remember a few years later, I went to the opening day of ET, and I sat in the audience and I was just blown away by the movie. But I was noticing that there was something else happening. It was the whole audience was kind of ebbing and flowing together. And so I went out of the theater at the end of the movie and I bought another ticket. I went straight back in and I sat at the front of the audience and I turned around and for the whole movie I just watched the audience.
really, wow,
And I thought, this is cool. And this is definitely what I want to do because to be able to create that kind of uniform emotional reaction in a large group of people is amazing. And in the early days of my career, like I got that experience working on comedy shows where we had live audiences, and I'd do like a mock album cover or a book cover or something that was a joke. And you spend a lot of time making these things hoping that it's going to get a laugh, and when it does get a laugh, it's a great feeling. And it's the same, in a movie when you're in the theater and the audience is like the full ooh ah moment when something happens. Um, it's pretty cool.
yeah. What an honor to be able to do something like that, where you get to touch people's lives. That's
I
what I
yeah,
always try to remind my team of when we're in the middle of the hard moments that you have in
yeah, yeah,
making it.
no, I was at a I was giving the keynote speech at a, technology convention in Brazil a few years ago, and a guy came up to me afterwards and said, "I just wanted to thank you for coming and doing this." He said, "But I wanted to thank you for something else." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "I was watching your demo reel, and I realized that you created my childhood, and I'd never even thought about it that way." But I tell crews that story all the time now, and I say, the thing is, we have really good days and we have very tough days, and it's really important to remember to not take yourself too seriously, but take the work seriously, because
Yeah,
you never know who what this shot that you're slaving over is gonna touch. It might touch nobody. It might touch somebody intensely to the point where it could spark them off on an entire career. So, don't let it get to you, but to take it seriously, because yes, it's entertainment, but we have a responsibility in creating entertainment to be good to people and be kind to people and to inspire people. And I hope we do that with everything we do.
absolutely. Yeah, it's a really interesting thing going into this new phase of technology and art that we're going into at the moment, and thinking about the responsibility that we do have in putting things out there into the world and thinking about what we're doing. And I know that you're also a keen artist in your own right, as well as all the work you do for studios. Can you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, I've been painting and illustrating since university. Well, since before that, since I was about 10 years old. So a little over 50 years. Uh, and I've always loved drawing. I've always loved the process of creating stuff. Originally, I thought I wanted to be a plastic surgeon. My
Really?
dad was a doctor, and he did some reconstructive surgery on people who'd had car accidents, and he would just remake faces that had been destroyed in car accidents. And I was blown away by that, and um, I thought that's what I wanted to do. And my brother ended up becoming a doctor, and my mum was a nurse, and dad was a doctor, and so it was a very medical family. And I was talking to dad one day, and he said, "So what is it about this that fascinates you?" And it was a very smart conversation from his point of view, because he knew that I was never going to get the grades that would allow me to do med. And and we started nutting it out, and I realized that it was creation. It was just making stuff and making stuff from scratch. And I'd always loved art, and I was very lucky to have a high school art teacher who supported me in that and pushed me forward in that, and encouraged my parents to do the same thing. Um, and so I realized, okay, so it's not plastic surgery and it's not reconstructive surgery, it's art. But now, as a painter, I love painting faces, because I've always been fascinated by faces. I love the fact that there are billions of different faces, but if you really look at them, there's a small number of variables, and you just chop and change those variables and you make a new face. But faces are incredibly complex. They're beautiful, and um, you see you see people's essence, especially in their eyes.
Mhm.
And eyes are one thing that I've always really loved painting. And so I started painting. I started doing some illustrations about 2016, 17, something like that, just doing color pencil illustrations. And there are some of those on my website. But then a few years ago, Adobe came out with a tool called Fresco, and it was just a paint thing. But it took all of the layering technique of Photoshop and compositing and all that stuff, and applied layers to painting. And so very much like Procreate, but it's just their own thing.
Yeah.
And I have been painting on that ever since. And I I love painting because I get to paint on my iPad with an Apple Pencil, and I don't have the mess. I don't need a room to be able to do it in. I can do it anywhere. I can do it on a plane. I can do it in a car. I can do it in a hotel. I can do it in a shop. I can anywhere, and you don't have to take all the gear with you. You just got an iPad and a pencil, and so I've been doing a lot of those. And you look at the website, the link's up there now. Jacqueline just put it there. So um, yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it also it keeps my eye in with lighting and all the elements that we are required to create and make look real in visual effects. There's really no better way to hone that skill than to paint faces, because if you can paint a face and somebody goes, "Oh, wow, that's Patrick Stewart," or that's Steven Spielberg, then you've hit all the right marks. And one of the real things in visual effects is if you know that it's going to take you, say, 200 steps to do an image that is photographically, like absolutely photographically real, um, in most cases, you've got time to use like 20 of those steps. So work out what the 20 most important visual cues are and focus on those. Then if you get time, flesh out some of the other ones. But so long as the 20 important ones are there, you're going to have something that looks real. And when it gets to visual effects and animation and motion, I always loved the old Bugs Bunny cartoons, uh, but especially when Bugs would move quickly, or he would spin his head from side to side, and they would do dry brush and multiple frames all in one illustration just to create the illusion of um, oh, I can't even remember what it's called now, but it created the illusion of like motion and
Yep.
motion blur. And where you couldn't get motion blur in animation because it was hand drawn, they would just animate a dry brush, and it was amazing that the illusion that created. And I think sometimes now I don't know, on Star Trek, certainly when we were doing that show, um, sometimes you would need something that was just a little bit of a soft brush, just to soften and add speed to something. And there's no better way to do that than just like a little brush. And we were doing. I was compositing supervisor for Armageddon for Michael Bay, and in the opening sequence of that movie, the asteroid comes in and hits Earth and destroys the dinosaurs. And the company that we were doing that shot at, um, Michael said, when it hits the Earth, I wanted to have these God rays that come out, and they were doing everything in a very early kind of particle simulation style. And he said, "How long is it going to take?" And they told him, and that was unacceptable to him because he said, "Well, I need this tomorrow." And I looked at them and I said, "Okay, guys, so you got an inferno here, right?" And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay, well, then let's use it. When is your artist in?" And I said, "Well, our artist isn't in." And I said, "Okay, well, I'm an inferno artist. Let's be there at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning and have the shot on the box." And so we got the shot on the box, and I animated God rays in 20 minutes. And Michael Bay looked at it and went, "That's the shot, done." And that became the element that we used. Um, Again, use the right tool for the job and use it in the right time frame that makes the producers and directors happy.
Right. Yeah, because the particle system was a sledgehammer to crack a walnut in that sense. Just to
Yeah, and
overkill.
especially in those days when it was very, very early days of that, and the technology was incredible, but it was very, very slow.
Yeah. Yeah, we could probably those kinds of shots you could do in real time programs now and have it appear before your eyes,
Yeah,
not have to wait and simulate on a farm for a week or whatever it was
exactly.
back then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your personal work, it sounds like, helps keep you inspired, and but it also helps keep your eye in and helps continue to kind of dial in the eye.
Yeah, yeah, it's important to just keep on drawing, and I think, when people ask me about what they should learn, in visual effects, a lot of people ask me that question expecting me to say, "Well, learn this piece of software and that piece of
Right.
software." And while that is absolutely a necessity these days, I love saying to people, pick up a pencil and learn how to draw. Pick up an airbrush and learn what an airbrush really does. Because once you know what the real tools do, then you can make the digital tools do far more than in some cases they were designed to do. Because you know exactly what it is that you're looking for. And so I encourage people to draw, paint, do anything, just create.
What what's it like, in your opinion, breaking into the visual effects industry today, say compared to what it was 15 or so years ago when it was usually recommended to start learning paint or roto or match move or those kinds of things? Is that still kind of the case, or what do you recommend to young people wanting to get into the industry
I,
as well as drawing?
yeah, I think don't go in expecting to be a visual effects supervisor in your first job,
Yeah,
because more than anything else, you get on set, and if you don't know what you're talking about, they will eat you alive.
yeah,
Um, you have to know the filmmaking process. And I used to say to people, okay, if this is the entire film process from first day of writing the script to delivery of the movie, right here in the middle is this tiny little room that is you. And you have to know everything about what goes on in that room, inside and out, forwards, backwards, everything. That's a given. But unless you know a little bit about everything that happens before that, you don't know what to tell them to do so that you can do your job right. And if you don't understand everything after that room, you don't know whether what you're doing in here is going to help them or hinder them. So understand the entire process. From that point of view, you really there's nothing better than starting at the bottom. Um, Start with whatever job you can get in visual effects. If it's a roto artist, then do that. If it's a paint artist, do that. If it's cleaning the kitchen, do that. Just be in the facility learning whatever you can, because the nature of people in the film industry is um, tends to be, certainly in visual effects anyway, a very sharing nature. And if you're around, you will learn. If you're not around, you won't. Um, but yeah, learn how to draw, learn how to do whatever you can, and start at the bottom. When you start at the bottom, you master that technique, and then you move up to the next one, and you master that one, then you move up to the next one, you master that one. Um, I've been lucky that I've done all of those things, but I did it at a time when I had no choice because I was the only artist in the
okay,
department. So I had to
yeah.
do everything. I had to do roto and paint and animation and compositing and all that stuff. And
You were the department.
yeah, and so now there are thousands of people on a team, and everybody has their own specific little skill set. I think it's good just to broaden your horizons and learn more about all the other ones as well, so that you just become a better filmmaker. Because at the end of the day, that's what we are. I read a great thing the other day about John Landau, who was the producer of Titanic and just passed away recently, and Lou Zudavern, who's a great miniature builder in Hollywood, was speaking at some event about working on Titanic, and he got up and he said, I make miniatures." And John interrupted him and said, "No, you're an artist." And and I think it's really important to remember that's what we are. We're artists and we're filmmakers and we're storytellers.
Yeah,
Seeing it.
so often people put the technology first, and I'm seeing that now almost more than ever with every kind of recent technical innovation. People seem to want to use it for everything, or explain that it's going to be used for everything, and
Yeah,
supersede everything. But with uh, with all of them, they still, story is the most important thing. The art is the most important thing, as you said so well in the beginning, that you should use the right tool for the right job and think about what you're trying to accomplish and what's the
yeah,
best and the easiest way to get there.
yeah.
How do you see that kind of? Um, I know we have a question or two
Got a
here from the
question there.
audience
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well. Um, what? Oh, I'll just ask you this question then.
yeah.
What was the most innovative technique that you had to develop to get the shot you needed? or the one you're the most proud of?
Um, a couple that come to mind. The main one, which is going back many years now, but it's still um, at the time it was like an impossibility. Was the shot in Titanic where Jack and Rose are running down the corridor being chased by a wall of water. And I say to people, what do you think the visual effect is in that shot? And they always say, well, the water. I said, no, it's actually not. It's real water and real people. It's just not Jack and Rose. And Jim Cameron had been not only the director of the movie, but he was also the camera operator on that shot. And so no one was willing to tell him that the elements didn't work. Um, but they took it to a couple of very large companies, two of the biggest companies in the world, and both companies said, no, this shot is not possible with these elements. So they came to me and they said, what do you think? And I said, well, I guess it's possible. It's just time and money. And if you got the money, I'll make the time. And so what I had to do was first of all, paint out Jack and Rose's heads and then replace them, which were the stunt doubles' heads, because it was stunt doubles running down the corridor. And then I had to put Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet's faces on them. But they're running in slow motion, 10-second shot, so 240 frames, right at camera, and she goes right past camera. And the skin's jiggling because they're bouncing, and the hair's flicking around, and there's water splashing off their faces. And so it ended up being a fully painted element because we had no way of doing CG faces in those days. So not up close. And so I ended up hand painting the entire shot. And it took about 17 hours a day, 7 days a week for 2.5 months to do that one shot. And at the end of the shot, I was at a screening at Fox, and Jim said to me, so you know why that was so hard, don't you? And I said, well, yeah, I hand painted the whole thing. And he goes, no. There's a much cooler reason why. And I said, well, what is that? He goes, it's never been done before. And it turned out that he had wanted to just see who was up for the challenge of trying to make this shot work. And it's funny because there've been a couple of podcasts over the years where people have torn that shot to pieces and said it just looks terrible and it's really rough, and then they find out what the process was of making it. And they said there's no reason why that shot should have worked at all. Anyway, so that was a big one. I had one shot on my first day on the shoot on Birdman. We were shooting at the St. James Theatre in New York, and the director said, so we've got this shot that the camera comes down a spiral staircase, and goes through a door up into the perms of the theater, and then goes off the edge of the perm and drops down to the stage, and then moves up to Michael Keaton's face. How would you do that? And I came up with a couple of ideas, and he said, how long would that take? And I said, well, we could do some previs on that and just check it. And and I gave him a time estimate, and he goes, well, that's not going to work because we're shooting this in 20 minutes. So this gets back to understanding the whole process. And I said, okay, do you have a stunt crew here? Yes. Do they have a descender rig? Yes. Do you have grips department available right now? Yes. So everybody got together and we designed this thing that we affectionately called the Trojan horse. And it was a big cart on big rubber wheels with a styrofoam nest in it. And the camera was on a descender rig that was from the stunt department. And Chivo, Emmanuel Lubezki, Chivo, the DP, and I were operating the camera, one on either side, and we let it over the edge of the perms and let it go very gently so it didn't swing, and the descender rig dropped it down. As it hit the nest, a charge went off and separated the cables, and the grips started pushing this thing and rode it out onto the stage and pushed it right up to Keaton's face. And we did it, and it worked, and it's in the movie. It was pulling rabbits out of every direction just to come up with an idea of how to get it done quickly. But that's the thing about on set. You come up with a quick solution and an efficient solution and a cheap solution, hopefully, and you make it work. So yeah, those two were big ones.
Oh, super cool. And involving the doing things a way that you wouldn't think as well. Like, well, especially now you know that you could do face replacements in CG that wouldn't think of doing it that kind of traditional way. But that's why I guess being a fine artist comes in handy, and thinking about practical things and practical visual effects as well as digital visual effects.
Yeah, I've said to people for years, I'm kind of like a glorified sandwich maker. I take elements elements that come from different departments. I could take a matte painting and a CG element and a live action plate, and I put them as a compositor. I would put them all together and make a really nice looking sandwich. Um, you just need to know how to pick those elements, and you need to know what makes something look real. Um, probably more importantly, you need to know what makes something not look real, because the audience are going to know when it's not right. They're not necessarily going to know what it is, but they're going to know that it's not right, and it's going to bug them. And so you never want them to get to that point. You want them to always just accept it and move on with the story. So we get another question there.
Yes. Somebody asks, how did you feel going from the guy who had to do everything to the guy who had 1,000 artists looking to you for guidance?
Relieved. Uh,
Right, don't have to do it anymore all
I
by
don't have to
myself.
do everything. It was, there's a certain joy in doing everything on a shot. Like on the Titanic shot, I did it the whole shot. Um, but when you then have a team of many, it's really nice to know that you can focus on just the creative and making sure that it looks right and it looks believable. I had a great lesson from Dennis Murin when we were doing War of the Worlds up at ILM, and I was working on a shot for he and Pablo Hellman, and sitting in dailies, and I was showing him this shot, and he said, "So, what do you think next for this?" And I told him what I was planning on doing, and he said, "Okay, I'll hold off on that for a minute." And he turned to the room and he said, "Okay, guys, so look at this shot. Tell me what you think. Does it do what it's supposed to do? Do you believe it?" And he played the shot, and the whole room went, "Yeah, yeah, absolutely, it works." And he goes, "Okay, you're done. Move on." And I said, "But I'm," and he said, "No, learn the lesson. Learn when to step away, because if it's doing the job, you don't need to do any more to it. Move on." And he was absolutely right. And the shot worked perfectly. And I was just noodling it to an extent that it didn't need to be noodled at all. And so I think, having the confidence to learn when to stop is a really important thing.
I wish more clients in the commercials ad agency world felt the same way.
Oh man, commercials. I spent years doing commercials, and I've got horror stories of creative directors who would make me do 30 different versions, and then the final one that
It's the
we
first
used
one.
was the first one that I made up, and not the 29 that they came up with. But that's the joy of doing commercials.
Yep. Yep. And how many times will you say that you did something and you didn't, but they think that you did, and that was the change that they needed that
Oh,
didn't
yeah, there
happen.
was one commercial I did for a car company, and the guy, after 30 versions, it was literally 30 versions, and we had 30 people in the room. That was a nightmare session. Um, and I had to do a version of this shot for every single person, so they all had their say. And at the end, he said, "Oh, I've got it. This is genius. See, this is why I get the big bucks." He said, I want you to do this. And he described this shot, and it was exactly what I had done in the first shot. So I just pulled up the first shot and I went, "So how about this?" And he goes, "Oh my God, you're so good. How did you do that so quickly?" And I said, "I don't know, just great direction from you. Thank you." Uh,
Good answer.
yeah.
How do you see the tools? I mean, we've talked a lot about how the tools and technologies have evolved since the beginning of not even computer graphics, optical, miniatures, practical visual effects, digital. Um, what are you seeing today in terms of the evolution of tools? Now we're seeing machine learning, or AI, as everybody else likes to call it, starting to appear and show promise things? Are we starting to see that appear in any parts of the visual effects process?
Look, to be completely
It's
honest,
already been in it,
it's
I
been
know.
in the visual effects process for a long time.
Yep,
We just don't talk about it. But
yep,
I think, like you and I were talking before this started, and I said that when we were doing Star Trek: The Next Generation and all the miniatures were being shot for the show, CG started rearing its ugly head. Ooh. And we thought CG could potentially kill visual effects. Um, the reality of visual effects worldwide is that it will always be developing and it will always be evolving. People will always be working out new ways to do things and better ways to do things. Sometimes they'll work out worse ways to do things, and we'll hopefully get rid of those quickly. But it's in and of itself, the nature of visual effects is one of evolution and coming up with new, better ways to do stuff. Now, AI at the moment is being seen as a threat. The reality is that a few years down the track, AI is going to be just along with all the other things. It's going to be another tool in the tool chest. Um, at the end of the day, you still need a human eye to work out whether it's believable or not. Um, you still need human eyes to watch the final product, and we're relying on a human eye to watch the product, not a computer to watch the product. So as long as humans are the audience, it's going to be another tool, and it's going to be a very powerful tool and a very amazing tool to use because it's going to make things like you were just saying, the face replacement, which cost close to $250,000 to do that shot 25 years ago, and now you can do it on your phone for free. Um, it's I love the fact that it progresses like that. I wouldn't. I would say to people, don't worry about it too much. It's going to upset a lot of people. But the majority of the people who it's going to upset are the people who are uneducated in the reality of how it all works.
do you think that it will help more people be able to create? It will give access to creativity using computers, visual effects, if you like, to more people?
Yeah, I mean, look, I when I first started on Classic Paintbox in 1980, I remember saying to the art director at ABC, this guy's name was Bruno Liepen, and he gave me my first job in television. So thank you, Bruno. Um, I said to him, this thing is the next major industrial revolution. It's This is going to do to everyday life what the steam engine did to transportation and the printer did to everything. Um, one day, I said to him, one day there's going to be one of these things. I don't know how, but in some form, in everything we do. And I reconnected with him a few years ago, and he just said, "How did you know?" And I said, "I don't know. It just made sense that this thing was staring us in the face, and you either get on the bandwagon and go with it, or you get left behind." So yeah, it's going to make I think one of the things is that the AI, and certainly as a main focus, is going to become more prevalent in everyday things. And so it's going to take things that were in the domain of visual effects only and make them available to everybody. It's like Photoshop did. I mean, Photoshop was really only in the realm of people who could afford Photoshop and who had the artistic skill to do it. And now anybody can get Photoshop so long as they can pay the monthly subscription and they can teach themselves. Um, it, I think one of the great things that I've always loved about visual effects and about sci-fi is that a script will get written and an idea will get made, and it's complete fantasy. But at some point along the line, um, somebody sees a TV show or looks at a movie and says, "Oh wow, that I know I could make the bit that does that of that thing," and somebody else goes, "And I can make the bit that does that of that thing," and then they get together and they they make this.
Right.
I mean, this was a communicator on Star Trek, and it was complete
All right, cool.
fantasy.
Yeah.
And the things that we made as fantasy and sci-fi, and made in films like Silent Running and Blade Runner and Aliens and all these kind of things are things that are now just everyday things in life because somebody with the technical knowledge outside of visual effects went and made it real.
I think it's going to be a very interesting few years. There's so much innovation happening at the moment. The push into virtual production and using more real time in filmmaking, more like what I guess you had in Flame, which is extremely expensive, but being able to do kind of Flame in 3D these days.
Yeah.
Um, you seeing more use of virtual production, or I guess more real time in visual effects in general?
I think there's a lot of interest from a lot of people about volumes
Yep.
and the large LED screens. Um, the reality of those things that you still have to make the content to go on the screen
Yep.
before you do it. So it's not like a magic bullet. You don't just go and shoot in front of a screen and it's done and it's magic and it's fabulous. It still requires a lot of work, and there are still issues with making those things perfect. When the setups are done very, very well, the shots are amazing. If there are issues with them, they can be a bit of a bear to fix, but as in all things in visual effects, everything is fixable, just time and money. Um, but I think we are definitely going to get down the path of seeing more virtual production becoming a reality. It's interesting, so many things start from the news. I mean, virtual sets have been in the news for 40 years.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, it's going to become more prevalent. But again, just another tool in the tool chest.
Right.
Yes, it is great for a cast and crew to not have to go to say Prague and shoot on location there because it's expensive and it's time consuming and all that stuff. And if you can do it on a stage in Los Angeles or Atlanta or wherever, that's great. There are going to be some times when you just have to go to the city to get the shot because that is the only way to get it.
Yep.
And so yeah, it always gets back to the right tool, right time.
Or you went to Prague and you need to do some pickups and you don't have the budget to go back to Prague, and then
Well, yeah,
maybe in that case, yeah.
and that's one of the wonderful things. And if you've shot enough B-roll there, you can use that hopefully to at least help start um, getting elements for your virtual stage. But I
Yeah,
love all this stuff. It's all progress and it's all advancement. And the longer we keep advancing this technology, the better it gets.
that's great. Yeah, good to keep the passion alive as well, right? If it stayed
Yeah,
the same, you'd get bored.
yeah. I think you know, keep the audience guessing, keep us guessing too. I mean,
Yeah,
you got to stay a step ahead of the game all the time, or at least try
absolutely.
to. And I think from that point of view, the other thing to say to people trying to get into the business is just never stop learning. And I've been doing this since 1980. Um, I never stop learning. I'm learning new stuff every day because you have to. Uh, if you don't, I mean, my grandfather said to me once when I was a little kid, "The day you stop learning, you die." And he was right. He was absolutely right. And I take his words to heart, and I try to learn something new every day.
That's great. Great advice. Actually, the only time in the middle of my visual effects career when I considered leaving it was I realized in hindsight was I'd actually done that. I pushed it hard enough for enough years that I wanted a break from pushing it as hard, and I slowed down a little bit, and I got bored. And I didn't see it until the other side of it. But yeah, it was exactly that. I tell people that at school all the time. Got one last question here before we wrap. Somebody asks, is being a generalist still the way to go these days? If there was an area to focus on, would you say real time or simulations and or compositing?
Wow, they all require such different skill sets. I
Yep.
think being a generalist is it's fine, but in and of itself, being a generalist means that you cannot give 100% of your dedication and time and training to mastering one thing. You kind of have to master everything. And if you try and master everything, this is just my personal opinion. If you try and master everything, you're not going to do any of them particularly well because there's so much to learn that um, you're kind of putting yourself a step back before you even start. If you can become the master of simulations or master of compositing, it serves you so well down the path, down the track. I was a compositor for 30 years, and I I know that all the things that I learned, whether it was from James Cameron or George Lucas or Steven Spielberg or a multitude of commercial clients or Michael Jackson or all these people that I work with, um, every single one of those experiences makes you a better filmmaker just by focusing on what you do. So if you want to be a generalist, go ahead. That's great. More power to you. But I'm very much a proponent of focusing on a skill set and becoming a real master of that.
An extension to the question that came in there, as some things kind of evolve and change, and we're seeing some of these maybe specialisms being disrupted, does that do you think it helps to have some generalism just in case what you're doing is kind of pushed aside a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. But I think that gets back to what I was saying before about, understand everything that goes on in your room, but understand everything before and after as
Yeah.
well. Um, before Immediately before and after is the rest of the visual effects process. So yeah, I mean, certainly understand it. And if you have the ability to be a painter, then definitely follow that up. If you have the ability to be a really incredible roto artist, do that. You don't want to limit yourself so much that you put yourself in a hole where you're unemployable because you can't be flexible. Um, but each person's got to do what's right for them and what is going to be the most beneficial to them in their career. And if that's being a generalist, then that's great. And if being specific to one skill set is the other, then that's great too. Everybody has different needs.
You've inspired me to pick up the pencil again. Haven't drawn for at least a little bit of time. I love doing it though, and I've done lots of life drawing. And I really, the more we step into the technological realm and pushing into virtual production and AI and these things, I feel more drawn back towards that because I agree with you. I think that the eye and the artist's sensibility um, is really important, and no better way of practicing it than to obsess about small lines in a drawing. I'm definitely inspired.
Yeah, thank you. I was just seeing this other question from Jackie.
Oh, sure, yeah, yeah. If you're up for taking one more,
Oh, as many as you want.
okay, yeah. I'll ask the question then
Yeah.
as it came in. Someone would love to ask about the work seemingly leaving the United States. Or do you see it coming back, or will it all end up in India? I know coming from the UK, as I moved to the United States, tons of the visual effects work was moving back towards London and up
Yeah.
towards Canada, and there's plenty of stuff going to India. And so, yeah, what are your thoughts?
Um, the studios are in the business of making money.
Yep.
So the best way to make money is not to spend a lot. If a if one country offers a better rate than another, then the likelihood of them sticking with the one that's charging more is very slim. I just saw last week that the Australian federal government has just upped the location tax credit to 30%. That is going to be huge because it means that a lot more things will be shot in Australia. The reality of all of those kind of tax incentives is that they tend to have a lifespan, and they don't last forever. So, does work go away? Yes, work goes away. Um, is it going to last forever? No, because the reality is that all this stuff is cyclical. I think it has been a very bad time for the United States in the last few years because so much of the work has gone overseas. But I think it's very important for us to show the world that um, as a filmmaking community, we have not been left by the wayside, that we are still strong and powerful and incredibly capable in all aspects of filmmaking. And work will come back. There will be work that won't leave. I know lots of producers who only want to work in the United States. Um, and that's for many different reasons. But I think it's a very real concern for everybody that work goes away. Just like the last year has been incredibly difficult and stressful for everybody in visual effects because of the actors and writers strike. We have all felt the pain of that a lot. But the reality of that is that those things will come to an end as well, and then work will come back again, and work will start up again. Patience is a virtue. Patience is a very difficult thing to hold on to sometimes when the times get very rough. But as a film industry, we've been around a very long time, and Los Angeles has been the center of it for the world for the longest time. And it'll come back. And the United States is people say movies and people say Hollywood. Hollywood's in the United States, so it's going to be there. So have patience, people. You're going to be fine.
Any tips on patience? Asking for a friend?
Just keep breathing.
Yeah.
Keep breathing. Take
Great.
just try not to take everything too seriously, because if you do, you can go down a rabbit hole. I have these two little buttons that I got for my car that went in the cigarette lighter in the car, but I keep those on my desk and I hit them both regularly
That's great.
because you need to have a little release. I
One of
think
for the audio people, one of them says eject, and the other one said fire missile.
fire missile, yeah.
Yeah.
Talk to people too. Talk to each other. Talk to people in the community. Don't feel like you're alone if the times get tough, because you're not. Everybody's in the same boat. And that goes for whether we're in bad times or good times. Even in the good times, people tend to forget to talk to each other in the good times because they're too busy. Keep talking. This is a business based on people, and people need to communicate with each other all the time. It just makes us better at what we do.
And again, inspired by your personal work and continuing to do things that that fill you up and that you enjoy yourself, that maybe aren't for work purposes, having a hobby.
Yeah, have a hobby. Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing worse than sitting in a dark room doing nothing because you haven't got a job to go to. Um, if you're in a position where you need something to fine tune your brain, just it doesn't matter what the hobby is. Cook. Um, my hobby is doing these portraits, and it's something that makes me happy, and it continually hones my skill, whether I'm working or not working. I do it all the time anyway because it's a great mind relaxant, but it's a mind sharpener at the same time.
Wonderful. Well, we've posted links so that people can check your work out. And before we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to share with people? Anywhere that they can follow your work, or anything that you want to share with the community?
I think Jackie just put the link up for adamhoward.art.
Yep.
It's got um, if you go into the drop down menu in the top right, there's a bunch of pages in there, all kinds of stuff. There's a lot of behind the scenes photos from film sets that I've been on over the years, and a lot of the pencil work, and a lot of the celebrity portraits, and a lot of other portraits that I've just done of just non celebrities. Um, but yeah, look at that stuff, and hope you all like it. And if anybody's interested, let me know, and I would love to take a commission.
Great. Fantastic. Well, Adam, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today. Thanks so much for coming in and sharing with the community, sharing your experience and wisdom and thoughts on where we've been, where we are today, and where we might go in the future. And your optimism, positivity is very infectious. And I appreciate you being here today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been really lovely to be here.
You bet. Thanks for being here. And yeah, thank you for to our audience as well. Thanks for coming in and asking some great questions. And you can look forward to another episode in a couple of weeks. We'll also be our open day in the 23rd. If anyone's at the Television Academy this evening in LA, I will be there doing a talk about AI and machine learning and stuff in the film industry. So might see you there. But yeah, keep on making great art, follow your passion, and to look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care, everybody.